Hey guys, how's it going? Kripp here. Today I want to make a video where I go over everything I've learned about the Sorcerer skills in Diablo IV and the builds that are likely to come as a result from it. This knowledge is from the open beta and the early access beta, so the game coming out in 2 months can certainly change a lot of this, but if you know everything in its current state, hopefully not everything changes by the time the game is released. I would say that there's a reasonable likelihood that none of it actually changes by the time the game is released. I highlighted a pretty powerful Sorc build in the How Good is Diablo IV video, which I imagine many of you guys have already seen. It is one that focuses on Hydra moving a lot and not taking really any damage throughout any parts of the game. It is a very powerful build, but it comes with one little issue, and the more you level, the bigger of an issue it becomes. The build actually doesn't very well utilize the extra points that you get going from level 25 to level 50, which we believe is when the actual skill points for the tree stops. So there are a few parts to the video. First, I'm going to go over the knowledge that I have acquired testing every single skill the Sorcerer has in its arsenal, and then I'm going to give you guys the builds, at least the direction of the builds that I imagine could work, and there are a number of Sorc builds that work quite well. And before you ask, no, I will not be making this type of video for the other classes. My process for these beta weekends was first to get general understanding of the game, to get a general understanding and try some of the more powerful builds for each class, then pick the class that I want to play when the game comes out, and then learn absolutely everything there is to learn about that class. So this is going to be a Sorc exclusive video, but at least I think it will highlight a process out as how you might approach to learn video games, because, well, I find it a lot of fun. You might as well, and you often end up learning and knowing the game to a depth that other people will not. So that's pretty cool too. Alrighty, so let's get into the game. Now, the build that I'm actually playing right now is the one that I think I'm going to go when the game actually releases. But first, let's go through every single skill, and I'll give you what I have learned. The basic skills for Sorc are actually pretty good as far as basic skills are concerned, but they are largely unused and in like actual builds. There's too many powerful cooldowns, especially defensive and mobility based cooldowns, for you to find a slot on your action bar. Now, if the action bar size increases, I can see some uses from these basic skills. Arclash is the basic skill that you want to begin your character with because it is the one that hits the most monsters and it does quite a lot of damage. You need to get 2 points in this first wheel in order to activate the core skills, and you don't want to spend more than that really playing a Sorc. The first upgrade for Arclash, if you crit, this is not if like the skill crits, like you have 5% crit, it's not like 5%. The 5% rolls on every monster, so if there's 10 monsters in front of you, you're going to have almost a 50% chance for it to strike a second time. With its base damage being 42% at level 1 and having, a pretty good range in terms of the cleave effect, hitting for potentially 50% more makes it easily the best skill for starting out. And before you ask, Blizzard has actually highlighted this skill as one of the weakest ones they intend to look at. I want to point out that it is the strongest basic skill that Sorcs have, so I'm not sure how they came to that conclusion, but if they want to buff it, sure, why not? Maybe if they buff it, Sorcs will be like a basic skill spammer like Necro in one of their builds in the future. The other upgrades, they're okay, movement skill, whatever. You just don't really want to worry about those. Firebolt is one of, if not the highest damage basic skills in the game, except like all of the Necro ones. Anyway, it just does damage over time, so you have to learn to read the health bars, because in Diablo IV, the health bar actually goes down to the predicted damage over time the monsters will take later. Now, this can be a little bit misleading, because it gives you the active and current damage over time projections. What does that mean? Well, if you have a damage buff if they have like vulnerability, it might look like the monster dies out completely, but the burn might be for 8 seconds, the vulnerability might be for 2, the damage buff might be if you move. So sometimes you'll see a mob that's actually dead from damage over time, but then you move and the debuffs drop off and then it doesn't die from damage at the time. So you have to understand you have to learn to read that a little bit, and that can be a little bit tricky, but nevertheless Firebolt is a pretty good skill. I would say that crits with Firebolts increase burning damage you deal to the enemy by 20% for 4 seconds. This one gives you mana, which is also pretty good. It has pretty good upgrades. It's a pretty good base skill. You're just not using base skills is the thing. Frostbolt is a fantastic base skill. The damage is okay, but it does a chill effect. It has a decent lucky hit. It has chance to explode on chilled, and that chance is 100% against frozen enemies, so it actually has a pretty good area coverage. And if you hit chilled or frozen, you get 4 mana when hitting monsters, and this is the AoE version if you hit frozen. So basically, Frostbolt is like your insane mana regenerator if you're playing a really heavy mana build, and there are reasons to play those. Yeah, their upgrade kind of sucks. Okay, Spark is, in my opinion, not very good. I don't really see myself using Spark. I didn't really like it. Yeah, okay, you get some like crit, maybe. I don't know. If you want to use a shock skill, lightning skill, you just use Arc Lash. Arc Lash is way, way better than Spark, in my opinion. In terms of the skills themselves, core skills, Incinerate is hopeless. The mana cost is actually charged when you begin channeling and at the beginning of every second. So in the first instant that you cast Incinerate, it actually costs 40 mana. Right. Don't use this. If you're wondering about the enchantment effect, and I'll go over into some of them, every 20 seconds a serpent spawns and incinerates enemies for 6 seconds. This regularly spawns over a screen away. You can't even see it, and it likes to shoot at rocks. Yeah. So again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying in the How Good is Diablo video. There are a lot of rough mechanics. I believe there hasn't been like a second pass on this skill. I think it's just horrendous. The enchantment effect doesn't even really work. Fireball's pretty good. The damage is pretty good. You can convert burning damage to extra damage. You're going to have to get some points in core skills just because there's not really a lot of great passives here. The Fireball enchantment effect is like the best one. It's pretty good. Frozen Orb does pretty good damage. It has pretty good lucky hit modifiers. You get chills. You get repeated damage, which is usually very good. Now the issue with Frozen Orb is that it's really hard to hit him with like a bunch of little things and the explosion. Unless you're in a small dungeon and you can fire it at a wall. Because when it hits a wall, it explodes, and it's very easy to control where that happens. I didn't really like Frozen Orb that much as a result of that. It's too annoying to use, and it's too situational, in my opinion. Especially given the fact that the other cold skill, Ice Shards, is one of the best core skills in the game. It does fantastic damage. All 5 hit in a straight line. It's very easy to hit the same target with all 5. If all 5 hit the same target, it does ridiculously high damage. If you put points into it because you want to use it, 50% chance to ricochet, so it acts kind of as an AoE, and you can make it trigger vulnerable, or you can make it treat as frozen if you have a barrier. I didn't really like those secondary options, but the damage is very good. The skill is very good. The enchantment effect is build defining, and we'll get into that in a second. So very, very good skill. I don't know if you really want to level with Frost, but maybe. I might try that a little bit later. The passives here are awful. I would never get that. Potent Warding is a little bit on the weak side. It gives you just flat all resists, and if you use like all 3 elemental types, it's like basically 3 to all. It's okay, you know. Chain Lightning is, on average, I would say the highest damage spammable skill that sorcerers have, because it's not like the Chain Lightning in previous games. If there's only one target near you, you shoot it at it, it goes back to your character and then shoots back out to your target. So it hits multiple times if it's just you. It does ridiculous damage if there's 2 or 3 targets, because it chains between them repeatedly, usually surpassing the damage of an Area of Effect skill. And the enchantment effect is not one I've been able to make a build around, but as we get like crazier and crazier stats, like willpower gives you resource generation, there's some pretty powerful resource generators that you can put the legendary aspects of on like rings and stuff, because rings have like the utility and resource slot. So there is likely going to be builds where you just like mana dump like crazy and get free chain lightnings. The other side of this is that chain lightning is a core skill. Core skills have big damage modifiers on like weapons and stuff, and we'll get into that in a second. And there is an effect where if you use a basic skill, your next core skill does a bunch of damage that you cast. That seems to apply on the ones you don't even cast, and it doesn't consume the stack. So if you're not using Chain Lightning, but you're using mana dump systems to proc Chain Lightning, you're getting the core skill damage multiplier without it ever going away. So there's some really sneaky stuff there, and I really like that. Chain Lightning also has pretty good effects. You can get increased crit chance per bounce. The crackling charge is also decent, and if it bounces off of you, dealing increased damage is also decent. In my opinion, Chain Lightning is at the very least one of the best, if not the best, skill to level up with, even as you transition into a Hydra build. It's very powerful. Charge Bolts is really annoying. I think it's mostly a utility skill. The damage is okay, but it's very single target. It's kind of like the Bone Splinters on a Necro. It's similar to that, like good lucky hit, good damage, shotgun ability, except it costs 40 mana as a baseline, so it's like, I don't know about that. But yeah, if you hit 3, you get more Charge Bolts. Extra damage to stun doesn't really matter, but hitting enemies with Charge Bolts reduces their damage dealt by 20% for 3 seconds. So it's a rare support/group skill that a Sorc has. Sorc doesn't have a lot of those, so that is, it may be worth using, just not for like actual damage. It's a support style. Flame Shield is very good. I don't really care for the upgrades that much. Teleport. Oh man. Now in the beta we are a bit stretched for points. We don't really have the option to max out teleport, but I managed to get a reading on a level 8 teleport, and it looks like it goes down by 0.55 seconds until level 5, and after that it's 0.44 seconds per level. Now we're going to get like 10, 11, 12 plus level skills if you focus on that on your gear. And if you get that on a teleport, you're looking at like a 5-second teleport baseline. Cooldown is reduced by 0.5 seconds per enemy hit. After teleporting, you gain 30% damage reduction for 5 seconds. Ridiculous. Teleport is unbelievable as a skill, and I do want to give you guys a little bit of a demo here. So this is still kind of dumb, but if you play super widescreen, if you don't play widescreen, you can't even see the other side of the cliff here. But as you'll see what happens with teleport, you don't even have to be on the edge of it. You teleport across and have space left over. So this is about 2 regular widescreen screens that you can teleport with. You can also teleport off ledges, through walls. It's just an unbelievable skill. Also, as I mentioned in a previous Diablo video, if you have the legendary power where you deal increased damage the longer you stand still, teleport does not break this effect. Teleport is not technically moving. Teleport can be used at any time and is instant and is the fastest A to B movement skill. So if you can get teleport's time down really, really low, it is unbelievably good. Ice Armor is a very good skill. Possibly, if you deal a ton of damage, getting constant barrier through it might make it okay, but it's like the 7th best skill in a lot of my builds. It just doesn't quite make the cut. Sorcs just have too many good skills. Frost Nova was a really big one, and this is where we get into kind of predicting the end game, and I think it's important to cover this. The original Hydra build that I made, it doesn't really account for the type of stats that we, at least for now, are seeing on gear. For example, like a staff, it has vulnerable damage, and it has a massive amount of it. We see basic skill damage, damage to crowd control enemies, core skill damage, there is crit damage, and I believe there's damage to like close or far. So those are the ones that you can get on a Sorc weapon, and you can get damage to burning enemies on a barbarian weapon, Don't ask me why that is. And a few others for some of the others that are actually pretty nice. But you can't increase Conjuration damage. Okay, there's no Conjuration damage. So now this is like my character, this is my well-geared character. I don't have like the mob that drops level 35 gear. I didn't farm that one. You know, 334 is a staff I can get in the instance I'm doing right now. So this is level appropriate gear, level 25. Obviously full legendary is not something you're going to get in the beta. But this is not that crazy weapon. This is a level 25 weapon. Now if we scale this up to level 100, I don't know where it's going to go. But you know, the maximum vulnerable damage on an achievable level 25 item is 22%. There's also going to be higher tiers of items. Now, if you get like a highest tier, perfect rolled level 100 staff on your level 100 character, that vulnerable damage ain't going to be like 22%. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be 22. It's probably going to be like 100. So if we're talking like 100 vulnerable damage, 100 damage to crowd control enemies, you know, we start to be like, well, we need to actually use those in our build. And the Hydra build, the baseline Hydra build, doesn't do that. Okay, so we got to start incorporating some ways to take advantage of some of those debuffs. And Frost Nova is an incredibly good skill. I actually replaced Ice Armor with Frost Nova in any Hydra build. You can get Frost Nova to reduce its own cooldowns if you're killing them during the Nova. It's very easy to do. And Frost Nova will give you an instant vulnerable effect. 4 seconds on normal mobs and 8 seconds on bosses. Leveling Frost Nova reduces its cooldown by a flat amount, which is nearly 1 second per level, which is also very good. Hydra doesn't really need explaining, except this one does. Invoked Hydra, I would say, is always worse than all of your damage gets added as a little bit of extra burn. The reason is that Invoked Hydra can't trigger, so after you critically strike, your Hydras gain 30% critical chance for 3 seconds. This doesn't work if you don't have a Hydra up. So you have to have a Hydra up, then with a non-conjuration skill, it doesn't say that, but you know, this is why we test things. With a non-conjuration skill, you have to crit, and if when you crit, you are next to your Hydra and not a screen away, you will get the buff for 3 seconds. So the uptime is horrendous. The amount of issues for uptime for this is realistically going to kill it. This upgrade is awful. Even though it looks okay, that's why you test stuff. Ice Blades is a bit of a sleeper skill. People made kind of like the cooldown spamming Ice Blades build, but the Ice Blades don't actually do that much damage themselves, but as you'll see, that's fine. You can get Ice Blades cooldown down by 1 second each time it's vulnerable. It hits a vulnerable, and it can trigger vulnerable off of itself. And half of its cooldown reduction is applied to all of your other skills. Not like one is reduced by like half a second. All of them are reduced by half a second. So you want to have cooldown skills, but that's fine because cooldown skills give barriers. Cooldown skills include teleport, which you can probably spam if you use this appropriately. It's very nice. Lightning Spear is actually pretty decent. It doesn't do that much damage, but it kind of swirls around. In terms of like how much damage it does when you press the cast a button, it's actually pretty good. It can hit the same target many times. Even though it's just 15%, you can hit the same target like 6, 7, 8 times. It just swirls around. It hits all the breakables. It's actually not bad. I wouldn't say it's good, but it's not bad. You deal 1% increased damage for each active conjuration. So normally you'd have full uptime on 1 Hydra, 2 if you have the legendary power. Maybe you have like half uptime on an Ice Blade, and maybe you have like half uptime on a Lightning Spear. So it doesn't look very good, but more about that later. Blizzard is actually a very good mastery skill. It chills. If you cast it over 50 mana, it increases duration by 4 seconds. So it's 12 seconds that it lasts, and it increases the damage accordingly. The damage overall is very good if you can keep them in the Blizzard. Increased damage to Frozen. Blizzards themselves will actually chain, chill, and freeze as well. Very, very good. The enchantment effect is not increased by 4 seconds because you are not the one casting it. The Blizzard is formed over you. Okay, so the enchantment effect's not very good. I tried making Meteor work. Meteor is a terrible skill. The enchantment effect is awful. I would say you can completely forget about Meteor. Firewall is an interesting one. It is the main source of damage over time. It is the highest scaling one. At level 1, it'll do 160. And then enemies take 25% increased burning while standing in firewall. So, you know, now we're looking at a 200% skill at level 1. For 28 mana. 30, I believe, because I have a little bit of mana discount. And enemies continue burning for 3 seconds after leaving firewall. So after the firewall escapes, I think it'll actually do another 3 seconds. So it's another, like, it's like almost a 300% skill. It's actually pretty good. It's pretty good. Ball lightning is like some really small range ball and just kind of zap stuff around it. I wasn't able to do very well with it, but I imagine if you have really high crit, the enchantment effect starts to be relevant. These shock passives are actually pretty good. Stun, mana from crackling energy. The mana cycling is going to be pretty powerful with chain lightning. These frost passives are pretty good. The barrier duration is probably going to be picked up by every single build. Instant freeze on lucky hit. Additional chill. If you're cold, maybe you consider getting that. The ultimate skills, you only get one. Deep freeze, in my opinion, is the best one because it can be used anytime. It gives you invulnerable for 4 seconds, but it really feels like 6, and then everything around you is frozen, so it really feels like 10. You also get a barrier that lasts for 6 seconds afterwards, so it's, you know, we're starting to get into the territory of like the 12 to 14 seconds invincibility / near invincibility. And then when deep freeze ends, and you can cancel it. If you press it and then press it again, you can cancel it. So if you're doing like a cooldown build, it'll drop the cooldowns of your non-ultimate skills by 50%, which is very, very powerful. Inferno does pretty good damage, and it's just a really fast cast. So it does 300% over 8 seconds. It's the highest damage, single button, single use skill, and the cooldown is a little bit lower. You can make it pull, whatever, I didn't really care for that. While it's active, your pyromancy skills cost no mana, so maybe that's something you want to do with like Firewall, I don't know. Unstable currents, lightning surges for 10 seconds when you cast a shock skill. A random core, conjuration, or mastery shock skill will also cast. This is obviously really good if you have a lot of plus skill levels. This is obviously really good if you're just chaining lightning skills and if you are a lightning build, because lightning builds have like lucky procs like all over the place, including some of these passives, which are pretty good. You can get movement speed, you can get extra crit, you can get stun, and you can get like damage on stun. Every time you stun an enemy, you deal lightning damage to them. These cold passives are pretty good. I don't really like elite-specific damage because elites does not include bosses, it does not include normal mobs, and it does not include players. So maybe this is needed, maybe higher difficulty levels are filled with elites, but, you know, as far as we know, maybe not. Damage to chilled and frozen is very good. Some vulnerable cold damage, lucky hits mana, it's okay. Increased cold damage to vulnerable. Cold actually has pretty good vulnerable options. Now, these fire passives are the worst. They're just the worst. They suck. After killing an enemy, increase your mana regeneration by 10% for 3 seconds. Oh. After standing still for 1.5 seconds, your pyromancy skill costs less mana. Right. Every 1 second, you heal for maximum life for each nearby burning enemy. Healing's not that useful when you literally don't take damage, though. And you deal increased burning damage to enemies for each second they remain burning, up to 5% after 5 seconds. Holy moly, that is the crappiest one. So all of these are horrible. Again, the bouncing is very bizarre. And again, this is why the pure Hydra build I highlighted as my beta build doesn't really scale to high level very well, because it doesn't crowd control, so it doesn't utilize the highly scaled stats on gear. It doesn't vulnerable easily, so it doesn't really scale the vulnerability damage stat on gear. And from like the 30 extra skill points that we will be getting, leveling our characters to 50 and completing the different, you know, repertoire, whatever things in the map, well, you're not really going to use those very well either, because the fire passives kind of suck. The mastery skills for fire, well, they also kind of suck. So yeah, and if we look over here, your burning effects deal 2% increased damage per unique source of burning you've applied to the enemy. If it's burning from 3 or more sources, this bonus is doubled. I don't fully grasp this, and we can't test this because this requires about level 30. Is each individual Hydra applying its own individual burn? I don't know. The way the Firewall enchantment works, each time the enemy takes burning damage. So the way burning works is if you do 10 different hits and all of them proc burn, all of that adds up. Each of those are kind of individual burn, but they kind of get into one big number, and then the enemy takes burning damage once a second. So the enchantment for Firewall is when they take burning damage. Okay, so that is going to take on average 20 seconds per mob. You're going to get that effect, which is it's okay actually. It's not bad. But how does combustion work with that? What is a unique source of burning? I don't know. You can get crit damage and crit with fire skills, which I think is actually pretty good, not amazing. Avalanche. This is, in my opinion, the best ultimate passive, and you can only have one of these. See, when you hover over it, it X's the other ones. Your frost skills have up to 10% chance to make your next cast of Ice Shards, Frozen Orb, or Blizzard consume no mana and deal 40% increased damage, and this chance is doubled against vulnerable. And Frost has a lot of vulnerables. You're talking about a 20% lucky hit proc. That's pretty good. And there's a legendary power to make this work on an extra cast, and I believe if you put that in your weapon, 2 extra casts. Don't quote me on that. After freeze expires, enemies explode for 25% of damage you dealt to them while frozen. I don't think that's very good, but who knows? Maybe density is crazy at high tiers. The second best passive is Vir's Mastery. Close enemies take increased damage from shock skills and deal 20% less damage to you. Critical strikes increase these bonuses by 25%. So you're looking at a 25% less damage taken, which is like a 33% survivability boost, which is really good. I would say that you can use this on any build. There's a good chance I will use this as fire/cold, even though it's only really buffing your shock skills. The damage from enemies close to you is very powerful. Crackling energy synergies. I haven't really gone super crazy with the crackling energy mechanics. Crackling energy is like your character has lightning and like zaps stuff around it. There's a few other mechanics that kind of tag onto it, like mana recovery and whatnot on the skill tree, and there are a few legendary powers that also interact with it. It looks pretty gimmicky at level 25, but it could be one of those mechanics that you kind of need a certain threshold to really, you know, go super crazy. Now that we are accustomed with the skills, I do want to talk about some of the enchantment effects really briefly. So the Firebolt one that I previously thought was really good, direct damage from skills applies up to an additional 23% burning damage over 8 seconds. So I was looking at Hydra. Hydra does like 50 at like level 8. So if I get 23 of that, it's like a 40% damage boost, right? Because it's not a lucky hit. Wrong. The up to actually means that it scales off of your lucky hit. Yes. And Hydra, while it has a seemingly high lucky hit chance of 72, that 72 is when you cast Hydra and all of the heads for the entire duration hit the same target, the combined chance of lucky hit is 72. This seems to be the case for minions and like temporary minions. It's not the case for actual skills. With Arc Lash, you use it once, it's a 32. For most multi-hit skills like Ice Shards, 26%. No, that's 26 per each of the 5. So Hydra is actually one of the worst, if not the worst skills for lucky hit, despite the tooltip indicating that it's great for it. If you use Hydra with a Firebolt enchantment at level 25, the target will actually take less than 1 burning damage until like the 3rd Hydra hitting it. And that's because it doesn't even do 1 damage per second off 1 proc. After it hits like 3 times, the burns that the targets are literally taking, you can visibly see it, it goes to like 1. And then 2. Usually that's where it stops because that's when the target dies. So another kind of consequence that I had with the original Hydra build that I mentioned, while Fireball is still a fantastic one to put in your slots, if you're playing hardcore, maybe you get the immunity cheat death proc every 2 minutes from Flame Shield, so that might work out. But other than that, the enchantments don't really work. So the pure Hydra build really does actually fail to scale in the endgame. A few notable ones. I mentioned Ice Shards is amazing as a skill and an enchantment effect, and that is a pretty big bonus because a lot of the enchantment effects scale off of the skill, so it makes sense to dump a bunch of points in them. Chain Lightning is unbelievably good. Again, it's a very good skill, and its own enchantment is very good. The Frost Nova one requires a little bit of testing. But if you have a lot of conjurations, it seems to actually proc a free Frost Nova, and Frost Nova is a very powerful effect overall. Replacing your dodge with teleport is surprisingly decent because if you're playing a cooldown reduction build, the cooldown reduction actually starts to apply to your dodge. Now, having a 17-second teleport instead of evade, that's kind of a long one, but, you know, with cooldown mechanics, it is perhaps worth it to do that. The Ice Blades is how you play the cooldown reduction build. There's a fair chance they're going to nerf this. Okay, be warned. On to the actual builds. So, the first build that I tried, and keep in mind, what you are seeing right now is not the Sorc that I was highlighting here with full legendaries. It is a level 25 Sorc that right after I hit 25, transferred no gear to it, I stopped replacing and upgrading my gear. It is a true leveling experience geared Sorc, okay? It doesn't have the double hide, it doesn't have any of that. So a few of the builds that I tested and I thought was worth noting, and perhaps builds you might want to play when the servers come out. All of these builds seem pretty good to me, but I'll tell you their advantages. But when you scale them up, introduce new items, introduce higher difficulties, all this stuff, I'm not in a position to say that build A is better than build B definitively. That's impossible to tell. But all of these builds seem pretty good and at least worth taking some notes on. Firewall. So Firewall does a lot of damage, as you can see. Yes, those are quill rats, but these characters, except for the final build that I will highlight, are not really that optimized. So maybe you discount like 20, 30, 40% effectiveness because I didn't play them at length. There's probably some minute optimizations that will stack up pretty nicely. So you can see that the Firewall is triggering under the mobs, that kind of like X. That's the Firewall enchantment proccing. Firewall is pretty good, but Sorc fails to scale a lot of mechanics with it. You're probably going to want to incorporate like Frost Nova to stick the monsters in place. Maybe you'll use like the Frost Nova Legendary Power where you can have 2 Frost Novas on cooldown that is only slightly increased. So overall, I think the build is okay. I would say that it looks like the burning type of build for Sorcerer is among the weakest, but it's still at a level where it's playable above, honestly, most other classes. One build that I think has a very powerful presence in the game is just pure lightning. You get all the lightning skills, and you get just the blades, the proc vulnerability. Look at the damage there. Oh my god. Again, this is a reasonably fresh geared level 25. This is not a stacked character. It has no over-leveled items. It actually has almost entirely under level 25 items. The damage is super good. The burst damage of lightning is super good. Just lightning and spam skills, I think, is a build taking into account the survivability is a little bit lower. It's still a very good build for Sorc because it seems like it just simply does the most damage, and you can scale it with crit, so it has fair scaling off of the stats that we'll have in the future of our characters. Pure Cold is a really interesting one. As you can see here, the main thing is the... actually, what is it called? I kind of have the ice skills mixed up. It is the core ice key, Ice Shards. Ice Shards automatically conjure and fly towards frozen enemies. This enchantment effect is really core to the build and ridiculously strong. You'll see that whenever targets are being frozen, they will effectively instantly die. And that is because this enchantment effect is very powerful, and you're not paying the mana cost for that, and it's continuously happening. And as a baseline, it's a very good skill. So we're trying to do Blizzard, for some pretty good damage. Anytime we Frost Nova, those shards are going to start slinging out. And when the Blizzard starts to actually, proc properly, in terms of the freezing again, it starts to shoot out shards again. This is very respectable damage, very good crowd control. And the really big part to note about this build is that you are missing Avalanche. Avalanche is going to be a massive power boost to the Cold build. I would say it is the best ultimate passive for Sorcerer, and I think it's one of the best ultimate passives for any character, as a matter of fact. So even though the Ice build doesn't seem to quite shine over the other builds in the beta, the Ice build gaining the most from just a few more levels, gaining the most because it's, with Ice, you're really easily sustaining vulnerability, you're really easily sustaining crowd control, even freeze with this build you're really easily sustaining. So you are going to be scaling this character up as you level. That is one of the more promising builds. And of course it's very defensive because you're freezing stuff. Now the build that I want to highlight here is the one that I will It's currently my front runner, but again, we don't know that much about the game. So I have my Hydras hitting. This is the world boss. And you can, if you take a quick look at my cooldowns, look at them refresh. Look at that. Ice Blades instantly dropped its own cooldown. That's like a 15-second skill. Okay, if we look at the ultimate skill, so right now I don't have a lot of Ice Blades up, but if we look at the ultimate skill, look at its cooldown dropping. It's dropping like 3-4 seconds at a time. So what is really working here? This is a Hydra build, but it's a Hydra build that keeps Hydra, so you still got your double Hydra, but it maintains some of the scaling mechanics and high point utilization of the skill tree. So it doesn't cap out as a full Hydra build probably will. The core skill here is the Ice Blades enchantment. For every 20 seconds in cooldowns you spend, you spawn an Ice Blades on a random enemy. Now, I have 1 point in the Conjuration Mastery just to kind of keep track of how many Ice Blades I'm going to have up. So the idea is that you just use cooldowns constantly, okay? And every time you use cooldowns, you're going to spawn free Ice Blades. So right now we have no Ice Blades, we don't have that buff yet. So if I do that, we have 1, and then we do this, and then we have 5, and then we have almost this. Oh, actually, I think we're capped on 5 right now. At higher levels of the skill, people are saying they cap out at 8. Honestly, it doesn't indicate what the cap is on the skill itself, but yeah, we know that you can get at least 8 blades simultaneously. Each of these 8 blades are reducing the cooldowns of this itself, its own skill, through the Enchanted Ice Blades passive here. And half of that cooldown reduction is being applied to all your other cooldown skills. So it's an incredibly defensive character, even more so than the other incredibly defensive versions of Sorcerer. Ice Blades don't do a whole lot of damage, but if you're getting them automatically, why not? Right? So I probably will use Lightning Spear here. And we have Ice Blades. We can probably get like 8 Ice Blades, 3-4 Lightning Spears, and 2 Hydras. So suddenly, getting 1% damage for each active Conjuration is like 15% damage for 1 point, and we have 3 of those, which is, well, that's pretty nice. We can fully max out Ice Blades to utilize the rest of our skill points. We can fully dump points into Frost Nova to get a better cooldown on Frost Nova. And suddenly, the fact that we don't have any good fire passives is entirely made up for the fact that, the Conjuration Mastery is there. We're going to have constant vulnerable. We're going to have constant chill and freeze, so just get lots of damage. One part that I really like about this skill and Sorcerer overall is that I wrote the best legendary powers here. So for two-hand, damage when you have high resource. On amulet, damage if you have a barrier. Glove or ring, yeah, you want like an extra Hydra. You want to maybe modify one other skill. Glove or ring, stationary damage. Glove or ring, damage to vulnerable target if you have a barrier. Pants armor on hit, you can easily get it to 100 stacks if you have all the conjurations. Chest, reduced damage from crowd control or vulnerable. And boots, damage to unstoppable. And that is an interesting one that I think I want to note here. Boots don't have a damage slot. So this, if you have a lot of crowd control effects, and I believe it's just passively working against the world boss, but I can't confirm that. Unstoppable is like crowd control immune targets. So it's the only way to deal extra damage on your boots, and also 20% crowd control duration. Hey, that's pretty good. So overall, I'm pretty optimistic that this character will scale into late game, but we'll have to see. Possibly the frost build will take over. Possibly the pure damage of lightning will take over. Possibly burn somehow magically recovers and surpasses all those builds. I wouldn't count on that. But you got to mix it up a little bit more than Hydra, and I hope you guys have enjoyed what I have learned, put this knowledge to use, and while none of these builds might be the best build when the game comes out, knowing how each individual skill works, how it is used, and which build it is most effectively used in, is knowledge that is very nice to go into a new game with. So, I hope you've learned something, and as always, we'll see you next time.